My name is Pedro Rios, and I'm the director of the American Friends Services San Diego area office. And our work, some of you might be familiar with our work. Our organization has had an office in San Diego for over 30 years now, focusing on border and immigration issues. And over the course of the time, our work has consisted of documenting civil and human rights abuses in relation to migrant communities, but also border communities. And it's been interesting to see the different changes to the landscape of border policies and how those have affected border communities, to the extent that, as a colleague has written about how the normalization of violence has become part of the natural landscape of border communities. And I think in today's discussion that we're having today, we're going to be discussing a new level of that level of violence. I think it's a new level of violence that is escalating to an extent that it not only has implications for our border community in general, but also has implications that move beyond the border community, because we're talking about a mercenary paramilitary force that has been implicated in the deaths of innocent civilians in Iraq and possibly in other parts of the world. And so I want to welcome, first of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. The purpose of today's meeting was to try to bring this discussion about the presence of Blackwater in Otay Mesa and possibly also the ramifications to the community in San Ysidro, and to bring together community leaders of the San Ysidro community, to bring together interested parties that are concerned about the presence of this mercenary force, and also to have an opportunity to ask questions of Jeremy Scahill, who has written extensively on the issue, who has reported extensively on the issue, and who has testified in Congress as well about the issue of mercenary groups, in particular about Blackwater. I also would like to welcome the offices of Bob Filner, as well as Ben Wessel, who are here today, who are joining us. Both Bob Filner and Ben Wessel have been supporters of our efforts to try to call attention to the implications of having Blackwater on the border. Bob Filner was initially proposed to have a press conference a few weeks back, and it was a really good move on his part to show solidarity with border communities, and so I want to welcome their offices here. I also want to thank Carol, Jan Grau, and also Ray Lutz for their staunch support of our communities in the South Bay, as well as their leadership in bringing to light this possible group that has now currently opened their doors to paramilitary training as recently as last week. And so again, I want to just give all of you an opportunity also to introduce yourselves. Maybe you can just say your name, and if you're representing an organization or if you're affiliated with the company, it would be important for all of us to know that. So we can begin.
I'm Jamie McCormick, and I'm down from Los Angeles.
David Flores, the chair of the San Ysidro Planning Group, and also development officer for Casa Familiar. Welcome to our space.
Good morning, my name is Lisa Cuestas. I also work for Casa Familiar as a program officer.
Good morning, Juan Ceseño, the San Ysidro Chamber of Commerce.
Vivian Valdivia with Congressman Filner's office.
Jake Van and I work with Ben Wessels' office.
Emily Anderson, I'm interning with the Office Center.
Bill John, Carol Peace Resources.
Martin here, the director of active safety very much interested in Blackwater.
Blackwater is within our boundaries.
Good morning, Tania Navarro, I'm a program with the Ysidro.
Ms. Camacho with Casa Familiar. Jose Morales, San Francisco State Student.
Yolanda Lopez from the Season Point Coalition. Monica Hernandez from Casa Familiar.
Adriana Hassan, I work with the American Friends Service Committee. Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight.
And thank you again. Welcome, everyone. We might have other folks who might stop by. We attempted to reach out to as many community leaders to the greater San Ysidro community. We will have some that will stop by a little later. And now just to introduce Jeremy. Jeremy Scahill is an investigative journalist with expertise on a number of global issues, in particular about mercenary groups, and with more particular expertise on Blackwater, let's say. He has written a seminal book titled Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army. And today he's here to speak to us about its possible implications for border communities, drawing comparisons with Blackwater presence in New Orleans after Katrina, and also to be able to address any questions we might have about the issue of having a mercenary force in our communities. So without further ado.
Well, first of all, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, the superintendent, as well as the representatives of the elected officials representing this area. I actually went to Potrero, California, last year to meet with residents of the town there, and the backstory to that is sort of an interesting one. Before it erupted into a scandal and a controversy, I had started getting emails from people who were residents of the town of Potrero, some of whom had nothing to do with any anti-war movement or any kind of social justice movements, but were simply residents of this town, Potrero, that were concerned about the presence of a company that they had heard about in the news and wondering what this company intended to do in their community. And the concern on the part of the people who initially contacted me had to do with very local issues that were not about the war at all. It had to do with the presence of large vehicles, helicopters, gun range, in a community that was very close to Tecate, Mexico, had a high population of people from Mexico who had come to settle in that area. And of course, this is just a town of about 850 people, so when a very powerful company came to their area, it raised concern and certainly was on the radar of people in that town. And so I began a dialogue with some of these residents, and then as the plans moved forward, groups that were aware of Blackwater's work in Iraq began to work with that local community to try to address the local issues that the company's potential presence would have raised, as well as the broader implications of welcoming a company like Blackwater into a community inside of the United States. And I think for our purposes today, there are three perspectives that are important to consider here when talking about Blackwater's move into your community. One is, of course, the local issues that are raised by this and the potential problems, or from the perspective of some benefits from having Blackwater come to your community. The other are the national issues at play here, and then the third is the global issue with a company like Blackwater. Before I get into the specifics of those, I think it's important to just note what I think should be a general principle of any community in any country around the world, and that is that the kinds of institutions or businesses that you welcome into your community ultimately reflect on your community. And in the case of Blackwater, we're not talking about a mom-and-pop hardware store that's trying to open shop here. We're talking about a very controversial company that provides privatized armed services to the United States government, to foreign governments, as well as to private corporations. On a global level, Iraq has been at the center of some of the most violent incidents in Iraq. Last September, I'm sure you're all aware of this, Blackwater forces are alleged to have killed 17 Iraqi civilians in a shooting that the United States military has labeled a criminal event, criminal incident. And the U.S. military expressed shock at the caliber of weapon that was being used. This killing in Baghdad of these 17 Iraqi civilians is the subject of a Justice Department investigation. The Bush White House has actually decided to investigate Blackwater despite the fact that Blackwater is a very politically connected company with deep ties not only to this administration, but to the Republican Party as a whole. There is also an ongoing congressional investigation into a number of aspects of Blackwater's business. One is the use of Blackwater in the war zones in Iraq and Afghanistan. Another has to do with potential violations of U.S. tax law on the part of Blackwater because the company has classified many of its workers as independent contractors and benefits from that classification in the U.S. tax system. There also have been allegations that Blackwater has been involved with arms smuggling in the north of Iraq, and that also is the subject of a federal investigation in the United States. Blackwater also has been investigated for its operations in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And before I talk a little bit about Blackwater's operations there and the potential connection to your community, I want to say that Blackwater's president, Gary Jackson, testified in front of the United States Congress in 2005. And the hearing that he testified at was aimed at looking for ways to greater privatize U.S. Border Patrol and Border Patrol training. This is potentially a very profitable industry, the border industrial complex of sorts. And many companies, not just Blackwater, are hoping to win business with the federal government to do one of two things, or one of three things, or all three of them. Train U.S. Border Patrol agents. Right now, Border Patrol agents are generally trained under the federal law enforcement training centers. Blackwater's president in front of Congress said that the company could do it for cheaper and that the training would be better. The second is that one of Blackwater's competitors, DynCorp, which is sort of the Walmart private security firm, it's a massive publicly traded firm that also operates in Iraq and Afghanistan, has suggested that it could put boots on the ground along the border as a sort of privatized border patrol that could be hired by the United States government to engage in border patrol activities, but it would actually be a private company whose services would be paid for. The third level of this is support technology for the U.S. Border Patrol. Blackwater is manufacturing a surveillance blimp called the Polar Airship 400, and they want the Department of Homeland Security and the Border Patrol to use this blimp for monitoring the U.S.-Mexico border. And so clearly Blackwater has adopted the potential for business along the border as a major part of its future business plan. Blackwater, at this point, is not openly talking about placing its forces on the border to be used as actual border patrol agents, although it's quite clear from the company's history that if asked, Blackwater would certainly step forward and try to do that. And so as we talk about this relatively small facility that Blackwater has in Otay Mesa, it's important to note that in other areas of the country where Blackwater has set up shop, their operations have grown rapidly and widely. And there have been controversies in the other areas where Blackwater has set up shop. In Moyock, North Carolina, where Blackwater has a 7,000-acre base, when they originally moved into that community, one of the counties wouldn't even permit Blackwater to set up shop there because of concerns of local residents. And there are regular complaints about the noise coming from Blackwater and the potential impact on the environment and a constantly revolving flow of people going in and out of this community. And certainly anyone who lives near a military base knows what that can do to the social fabric of a community, especially if they're not official U.S. military. They're people that are gun enthusiasts or others. And so Blackwater simply crossed from one county into the next county in North Carolina to get the paperwork done, and then sprawled into that original community. And so their facility now spans over 2 counties, including one that originally said, we're not going to let you operate here. And so they're based in one county but spread into the other county. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, I should say in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, Blackwater's owner, Eric Prince, decided to send 184 of his men with a Puma helicopter into New Orleans. And a senior company executive at Blackwater told me quite clearly that when Blackwater sent its men onto the streets of New Orleans with M4 assault rifles and Glock 9 pistols, that they did so with no government contract. In other words, they just decided, we're going to send men with guns onto the streets of a U.S. city. Within about a week or so of being in New Orleans, Blackwater was hired by the Bush administration through the Department of Homeland Security's Federal Protective Service to engage in security operations for FEMA. Now, I don't know if FEMA has even arrived yet in New Orleans, but Blackwater certainly was there. And one of the reasons why Blackwater was hired by the Bush administration is because the forces in Louisiana that would have been the logical ones to respond to the disaster there would have been people from the Louisiana National Guard. But much of the staff many of the staff of the Louisiana National Guard were actually deployed in foreign war zones in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so when they were desperately needed in their community, they weren't there, and so Blackwater stepped in and said, we can do this job, we can provide security, we can engage in rescue operations. The Blackwater men, and I was there in New Orleans, and I met Blackwater operatives on the streets of New Orleans. Some of these men had just been in Iraq 2 weeks earlier, guarding the U.S. ambassador or engaged in other U.S. operations in Iraq or Afghanistan. They were heavily armed, and they told me that they were there to confront criminals and stop looters. Those were their exact terms. They said they'd been authorized to use lethal force if they deemed it necessary. Now, it's one thing when they started working for the Department of Homeland Security. We can have a debate about whether or not we want privatized forces working on U.S. government contract. It's another when a private company decides it's okay to deploy armed on the streets of a U.S. city. And clearly, Blackwater made a decision at the highest levels of the company that they were going to do this. And it raises a number of very serious legal questions. Who's to say that the forces that they deployed on the streets have any training whatsoever in the protection of constitutional rights of individual citizens that they would encounter? Who's to say that these forces are being monitored by anyone in any effective manner? I mean, there was tremendous chaos in New Orleans, and what was desperately not needed was more guns on the streets. And so Blackwater's forces just brought more guns into the city at a time when actually the Louisiana law enforcement agencies were taking people's guns away. Blackwater was bringing more guns into the situation there. Immigrants inside of Louisiana were systematically targeted while at the same time being denied access to federal benefits. I remember being in Gonzales, Louisiana, and visiting a church where Honduran immigrants were essentially hiding. And some of them had lost all of their papers, and they walked over 40 miles from New Orleans to Gonzales to try to seek help from the church because they were afraid that if they sought federal assistance, that they were going to be put into detention and potentially deported. And there is a very vibrant, well-established Honduran community in particular in Louisiana. There also is a Mexican community as well. And so these people were facing harassment from ICE. They were being denied federal benefits, and then they were facing down against the fact that you had privatized militia-type forces that were operating with no legitimacy to the government or no connection to the government whatsoever on the streets there. And so Blackwater clearly is a company that is not only seeking out federal business, but believes it has the right to deploy its armed forces when it deems it necessary. And so the issues that were raised by Hurricane Katrina, I think, become relevant to this community because while Blackwater has a building that's 60,000 square feet, this is a company that really is at the cutting edge of the privatization of several of the key components of the U.S. national security apparatus, and certainly has a vision that would aggressively welcome more and more business. So when we look at this, we can't think for a moment that the 60,000 square foot facility in Otay Mesa is necessarily the end of Blackwater's agenda here. This is a community that is an area of great potential growth for Blackwater. You have not only the business with the Border Patrol, in whatever form that will take, training the Border Patrol, potentially offering private forces to work on the Border Patrol, the technology aspect of it that I spoke of before with the surveillance blimps. Blackwater is also creating its own armored vehicle called the Grizzly, which is being portrayed as the most revolutionary armored vehicle in the history of warfare. It can go up to 65 miles an hour, and they're trying to get it licensed for use on U.S. highways as well. There also is the very large military community here. Blackwater is a company run by former Navy SEALs. The owner of the company himself is a former Navy SEAL, as well as other special forces operators. Blackwater does a very robust business with the U.S. Navy. in training. Much of that work is done in North Carolina. Blackwater clearly wants to set up a Western outpost that they can use to win more business. And so this is not just about a 60,000 square foot facility in your community. And I think that these are issues that at a minimum require a public hearing for the people that are going to be living around this company. For the local issues that were raised because of the issue of immigration and the human rights issues and the civil rights issues that are raised by that, but also because this community should question, do we want a company setting up shop here in whatever manifestation that is under federal investigation, not for some backroom fraud or something, but for allegations that their operatives actually killed innocent civilians in an unjustified and unprovoked manner. It doesn't matter that it was in Iraq. It's what this company has been a part of. Do you want a company that is being investigated by the United States Congress on allegations that it may have engaged in some kind of inappropriate activity with the way that it classifies its employees, potentially tax fraud, in the words of Congressman Henry Waxman, who represents Los Angeles, and also a company that very clearly is the tip of the spear of a radical privatization agenda in this country that sees a systematic defunding, for instance, of our public schools. They take away the money from public schools and then they say, well, the schools are failing, so we need to privatize the schools. This is all part of the same picture. And so this isn't just one company coming into a community with a small facility. It's a part of a much broader agenda. And so I think it's very important that local officials here take this on as an issue for the community to discuss in both its local implications as well as its national and global implications, because ultimately this company is going to be a reflection of the community or the communities in this country where it operates. And so those issues, I think, are of pressing importance here to people in this community, but also to the broader state of California and indeed the world, because this right now, you all are at the front lines of a domestic expansion of one of the most powerful corporations operating in the so-called global war on terror, at a time when there is a raging debate about immigration in this country, about the privatization of the Border Patrol and Border Patrol training. So the stakes are very, very high here, and I think that the people of Potrero were right to raise concerns in the way that they did, and to fight against what was a process that was secretive in nature. I think there would have been many people in Potrero who would have had a very different view on this had there been transparency, had they felt like their voice was being heard. When Blackwater was challenged by the mayor of San Diego and the city of San Diego for this particular facility, instead of having a public hearing and going in front of the people of Blackwater saying, we want to make our case to the people of San Diego, and we want to talk to you about this, Blackwater went to a federal judge that was appointed by the president's father and said, will you intervene in this case? Now, Mike Aguirre, the city attorney, I was reading this morning in the San Diego Union Tribune, is saying that he believes that this is an issue that should ultimately be decided in state court. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know the particulars of this situation so well, but I do know that something smells very fishy when a very powerful corporation that is not a San Diego corporation, that is not a California corporation, comes into a small community, and when the community says, we have serious questions about this, we want to look over the paperwork, we want to know exactly what's happening here, they go then to a federal judge appointed by the president's father and say, will you intervene in this matter? And so on the surface, the way that this has been handled, the lack of transparency from the Potrero situation, the lack of respect for the will of city officials in San Diego who are elected representatives of the people here, should raise serious questions about the way that this company operates and what it potentially intends to do in your community. If this is how it starts, the relationship starts, what happens if something goes wrong and the people of this community want to know what happened or want to investigate it further? There's a climate or a culture of secrecy that surrounds not only Blackwater, but all of these companies that are aggressively seeking more business inside of the United States as part of a disaster response industry or a border patrol industry. And ultimately, these are taxpayer-funded operations. The money of taxpayers across the United States will be going to pay for what happens inside of that building at Otay Mesa. So it's everyone's business right now, because we're talking about contracts that potentially go into the hundreds of millions with the United States Navy that Blackwater is bidding on and competing for. So I want to open this up to conversation, but I did want to close what I'm saying by mentioning the following. I don't live in San Diego. I don't live in California. My purpose in talking to you today, or my hope in talking to you today, is to realize, is to help all of us realize that this is a very much a local issue for this community, but it also is an issue that reverberates outside of your community. And that's why I think it's important for all people in this country who are concerned about the future of U.S. democracy to pay attention to the struggle that's happening in your community right now. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or take any comments or hear the perspective of anyone in this room about this issue, because I also am here to learn about this situation, and I thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Henry. And I think it would also be important to contextualize what's taking place around the border, communities on both sides of the border, with this increasing notion of, or what's been taking place in Baja California, principally around the drug cartels and the infighting that has, in many ways, said to have trickled into the U.S. as well. And one of the things that you mentioned last night at the talk that you gave was that the potential for Blackwater to serve as a possible source, or as a possible resource for the instability that is taking place in Mexico regarding the possible drug and trade cartels, and that the possible ramifications that might have for their future enterprise. I think that also might be something that could be worth discussing at some point.
Can I make one comment on that? I mean, one of the other aspects of Blackwater's business is they do work for the Drug Enforcement Agency. And Blackwater is now bidding on part of a $15 billion contract with the Pentagon to actually operate in the so-called war on drugs, in a program that at present targets in Latin America the nations of Bolivia and Colombia. With Plan Mexico, there also is a $1.5 billion budget that potentially could be a market for some of these companies. And I think the issue, though, when we're talking about the participation of these companies in anything having to do with the Border Patrol or the DEA, is to look at what's happened in Iraq. They're working on official U.S. government contracts, so they're not freelancing. And when they do something that results in civilians dying, what we've seen is that no one holds them accountable. That should be an issue that cuts across political lines in this country. This isn't a Democrat or Republican or a liberal or conservative issue by any stretch of the imagination. If a U.S. soldier kills someone in Iraq and it's believed to be a murder, that soldier will be court-martialed under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. 70 soldiers in Iraq have been court-martialed on murder-related charges alone. Not a single armed security contractor, like those that work for Blackwater, Triple Kennedy, and DICOR, have ever been charged with any crimes whatsoever, despite the overwhelming existence of evidence suggesting that they do kill civilians. And so if we look at the record of these companies and we realize that they potentially are going to be operating in your community, what's going to happen if something does go wrong? Will they be held accountable? How will people in this community, if something does happen that's violent, or something does happen that's scandalous or controversial or results in loss of life or property, how will you have any assurances that anyone from the government is going to do something about it? Because these forces have shown themselves to be effectively above the law and accountable to no officials. I have members of the U.S. Congress that call me and ask me for information about that. And I sort of laugh and say it should be the other way around. I should be calling you and asking you for information. But that's the state of affairs right now. It's all shrouded in secrecy. And so when we talk about the potential use of these forces inside of the United States, this isn't just about some small shooting range somewhere. This has to do with forces that have shown themselves unaccountable elsewhere. And what assurance do we have that it's not going to be the same here? It'd be a great leap of faith to say, oh, well, it can't happen in this country. I mean, it would almost sort of be an arrogant position to take. because these companies, this is very big business. This is very high stakes stuff we're talking about. And with the immigration debate, as they call it, the way it is, and the tremendous violence meted out against immigrants in this country, and the xenophobia and the racism that we see in this, and the dehumanization of people based on their national origin, those are all factors to consider when we talk about then adding an element to that is less accountable even than many of the unaccountable forces that are officially engaged in this on the U.S. government payroll. So these are very important issues, and it's important to look at the record of these companies in Iraq and Afghanistan as we talk about an escalating situation along the U.S.-Mexico border.
You know, the drug war is alive and in color across the board. Right? There were 10 killings just this past weekend related to that. The government, the army, Mexican army has their work cut. What is it to say that Blackwater will start training warlord bodyguards?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, Blackwater services are on the open market. I don't think that Blackwater in particular would take that kind of work. I think other companies would certainly.
Under the same umbrella, probably.
Well, it would be the same kind of operation. I think Blackwater would rather get the business from the U.S. side and working with official law enforcement. But these cartels, I think, are going to continue to look at ways to protect their operations. And we know that there has been corruption within the official forces on both sides of the border regarding this ongoing war here. I would say that that nothing is off the table for these forces. They're going to do what they need to do to protect their assets. But I would imagine, because Blackwater is not just a company concerned with profits, but also supporting the ideological agenda of those in power in Washington, that'd be unlikely that Blackwater as a company would take that kind of work. But I would be very concerned that these cartels would try to hire U.S. forces, and I don't mean official U.S. forces, but some U.S. entity to try to protect their operations.
Jeremy, first I want to thank you for coming out and joining us and giving us all this information. I had really no idea what Blackwater was, except that there was a training facility going on up in the Mesa. A lot of the background and history of Blackwater and what we're talking about, I mean, clearly they're taking advantage of the fair enterprise in the United States. They can build a business and be profitable and see those areas where these opportunities lie. And it's really obvious that the government is, it's very two-faced about a lot of the things that they do. Once they take them under their wing, they go out and do atrocities. They're not going to take them and shove them back into prison or something like that. They're going to let them do their thing because they're getting paid by the government. What is it? I mean, it goes from global, from national to a local city right here in San Diego. What is it do you think we can do? I mean, are there any other organizations? Is Blackwater present in any other part of California?
I'm not aware of Blackwater's presence anywhere else in California, but let's remember that it took activists and others digging around to even reveal that Blackwater was the company in question here, because it was buried under layers of what are effectively shell companies.
When Mike Curious come back and said, it's clearly a state issue, I mean, I don't want to be naive about it, but it's clear to me that the state, Arnold Schwarzenegger is very, very militant in that sense. I mean, what is his position? Has he commented on Blackwater at all? Has there been any kind of contact with?
Well, one of Blackwater's former lobbyists was working within the California Department of Homeland Security at the time that the Potrero scandal broke out. His name is Chris Bertelli, and he was working in the Schwarzenegger administration. And after questions were raised about the fact that he worked in the Schwarzenegger administration, he ended up being transferred to or took a job in a different department within California. He worked for the California Department of Homeland Security and was one of Blackwater's main spokespeople at the height of some of the scandals and controversies involving the company. To my knowledge, and there were reports that Blackwater officials met with Arnold Schwarzenegger about potentially doing disaster response in California. And the reporters who broke that story were from the Virginia Pilot, which is right in Blackwater's backyard. And they swear up and down, these reporters were nominated for the Pulitzer Prize for their coverage of Blackwater, that Blackwater officials told them that they had met with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger's administration then denied it and said, we know there was never any meeting whatsoever. And then Blackwater backtracked on the story and said, oh, we never met with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I tend to believe the reporters from the Virginia Pilot who were nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in this because they did interviews with Blackwater executives who said that. What the future of what Blackwater would want out of California, I think there are many, many answers to that question. But the reason that I said to you at the beginning about the shell companies is it would take aggressive investigating in municipalities all throughout California and counties all throughout California to determine if they're even here. It could be that Blackwater is operating in multiple places and it's just registered under a company that doesn't say Blackwater.
So what, I mean, when you kind of bringing the information to the community of this size or even larger for that matter, what do you think as community leaders, what should be our objective should be?
Well, I'm glad that the superintendent of schools is here because this also is an issue that could potentially have a great impact on young people in this community, especially if this company grows. I think at a minimum right now, city officials as well as the national representatives who represent this area, whether it's the congressmen or it's California's senators and the state representatives, there should be public discussion of this. Blackwater should be required by this community to come in front of the public and answer questions about their intentions here. And I'm not saying this as part of a legal process or that it necessarily even has to have to be some binding thing. If you want to operate in our community and you have the reputation that you have, you could at least show us the respect to have a public forum where people from this community can come and ask you questions about what your intentions are here and about your corporate reputation in general. As a basic minimum gesture of good faith on the part of Blackwater, the company and its representatives, and Brian Bonfiglio, who's running the show for them here, should be required to come in front of the people of Otay Mesa and the broader San Diego community in a public forum that's open to the press and open to any residents, concerned residents, and answer questions for as long as it takes for people to have their voices heard.
It's clear. I mean, it's clear to me that the Blackwater has gone as far as it's gone. It's completely protected, and the public really is unprotected in that sense, unrepresented. I would be very, very curious to know what our congressman is really what position he's taking.
Well, Bob Filner you're talking about Bob Filner?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, well, Filner has been very outspoken on this issue. He certainly took up the cause of the folks in Potrero, and has been one of the few people in the Congress to actually take on the issue of Blackwater on a national level in this country. And I think if you go back and when you're sitting next to one of Bob Filner's staffers, if you go back and look at what Filner's been doing, he actually has been spending a good bit of time on this issue and has been working with groups that are raising concerns and raising their voices about it. But it's not just about congressmen from this issue. In many ways, it should be the local officials here that try to organize a town hall where Blackwater comes in front of the people and answers questions from people.
So that should be one of our objectives.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the other issue here, though, is, and I'm sure that local folks here have more ideas on it, but I'll just say this briefly. I think that there should be a discussion with Mayor Sanders also. He's been saying, sort of backing off of some of the things that he initially said, and now appears to sort of be saying it's a fait accompli, everything's fine, and kind of rubber stamping the operation. And it seems like Jerry Sanders should have to answer some more questions from people, particularly in Otay Mesa.
I met with one of the representatives of Jerry Sanders this morning, and I wondered if you'd be interested in coming back and speaking to a larger crowd, and then we can organize a forum, a public forum, where you come back and have a bigger crowd and a bigger audience. It becomes more informed, therefore we can maybe start it again. I'd
be happy to come back here anytime and talk to people. I mean, this month is a little bit crazy because I'm going all around the country, but I mean, I'm available and would come. If the day works out, I would.
Is there a timeline that we need, the monument?
I think on June 19th there's going to be another decision.
June 17th.
June 17th.
There will be a court hearing. You know, Blackwater did go to the federal court, but they got was a temporary restraining order that directed the city to give them their occupancy permit. On the 17th, there's a hearing to make that restraining order in the city permanent. And we're going to be having a demonstration there. I think it's also very important for people to come and be in the courtroom to listen to what Blackwater has to say. Mike Aguirre is going to be arguing this case himself, so I encourage you all to come to this. And I just wanted to add that I think that this supporting the city's law, supporting the city and the city attorney is very important at this point, because Blackwater learned in general that if you let the people have a say, they're going to lose property. I mean, the people in Potrero really didn't want that. And their end run around this was to start their permitting process here in San Diego for the airtight facility back in September, when we were very tied up with the airtight Mesa situation, the Potrero situation, and they came in and did this as their plan B backup plan while they were distracted, while they were using other names. We only found out about this through a tip that we got in April and started looking into it, and thankfully Bob Feller's office got very involved and contacted other folks about it. But this legal issue is very important because Mike Aguirre plans to take this all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And he believes that a federal judge does not have jurisdiction over this issue. So if that is upheld in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, what it means is it could kick back here. Blackwater will have to go through the permitting process here in San Diego. And what the city attorney's report says is that Blackwater needs to comply with CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, to do what they want to do out of the And that means they're going to have to go through a public hearing. They're going to go through that's another key point where the public really could have pressure. And I think it's very important for us to try to get that back in that area where we can do that. We can have a public hearing that is a legal hearing and a legal process they have to go through. The city council is very important in this in terms of deciding whether this becomes a discretionary permit as opposed to a ministerial permit, which Blackwater is arguing that it's ministerial and that the other people can make the decision. It doesn't have to go before the city council. These are two key points where we can hold them accountable and by law make them come and do it. The community forum is an important thing too to raise that. But this lawsuit is very important, and it's very important that we support what Gary is doing and bring attention to it and get in there and do what we can.
If I can just add to that, because it was nice to see Mike Aguirre at our meeting last night and listening to comments from Jeremy about his book and history of Blackwater. The thing is that, yeah, when you, when you put in a project in the city, a larger project like we're doing, which is going to have basically warfare training in an unsecured area, which is just an industrial park. And putting this is quite a deviation from what they originally planned. They say it's a vocational school. Well, the vocational school training that they really intended was for people that might work at the industries there, like maybe a circuit board manufacturer. You could learn how to make circuit boards in a vocational school. And it's not, they never intended it to be a warfare training zone. And so when that kind of thing is brought in, and as I look at it, there's all this blank land next to it where they could expand into putting in more warfare training, which is really what they want to do. Well, they put these projects in under the various names, and each one of those was marked ministerial. Well, I didn't even know what that meant before I went in, but that means that it's a rubber stamp. It's just handled within the building department because it's so simple. You run a new electrical wire to your lights, it's ministerial. But all taken as a whole, and the fact that they want to do warfare training, this brings it up to a level past ministerial to what they call discretionary. And that's when the community gets to weigh in on it. Then you have to have meetings with the community. They did all this to bypass no need for any community hearings. And that's when Kelly Broughton, who is the head of the Development Services Department, after Mike and Gary did his little investigation, he finally came out and said, no, we're going to say that this is discretionary instead of ministerial as a whole. And that's when they brought it into federal court. And what Mike and Gary right now is arguing to this particular court is that they don't have jurisdiction. It should be, because this is like the highest court in the land, peering down and getting to the lowest possible permitting process that you can do within the city. And he says they don't belong here. This is a city sovereignty issue. But even with that, let's say he wins and it goes to state court, he'll argue the fact that the city has the ability to say this should be discretionary and that the community gets to weigh in. And as Jeremy was saying, you put warfare training in your community, you should come to the community and say, is this okay in this area to have warfare training? It's my view that you should put warfare training on government-secured property and have it under the jurisdiction of government bodies that we have supposedly the ability to oversee. And we put it in private hands. We don't know what's going on in the building. I don't know what kind of, and then the question in my mind is, why does it need to be in private hands? Is it because you're doing some type of training that the military can't do themselves? Maybe some kind of crazy Christianity, thing, because they're a very Christian thing, indoctrination, I don't know what it is. But why are they still, it's been 8 years, they could have this in private hands by now. But that, we'll see, Gary was very talkative last night in terms of telling us that it's going to the Ninth Circuit, and then if it's brought to the state court, he'll argue that it should be brought out to the community. So that's my real goal, is to get this particular project reviewed to make sure it's okay with the community.
If I just add one other thing, I also think that it's really important for the city council to escalate its involvement in this. I really think that the key to this, beyond the battle that's being waged by the city and by Mike Gary and others, is separate from that whole process. People need to be involved in this. They need to be asked what they think about it. And it's the responsibility of the locally elected officials of this community to represent their constituents by taking on this issue. And the city should and the city council or individual council offices should formally request that Blackwater make itself available for a public consulta or a discussion on this issue. It's something even beyond the legal battle. It's saying, you want to come into our community and run a warfare training center, we have questions about that. Any responsible business in a community should be willing to meet with the people who live in the community where the business operates. Particularly if you're talking about a business that brings a bunch of guns into your community and is a private entity. That should be discussed, and it should be the responsibility of locally elected officials to represent their constituents by formally requesting that Blackwater come in front of the people who want to ask some questions and do it publicly.
Jeremy? Yes. Any tips you might give us? Because San Diego is not like another city, say in North Carolina, South Carolina, somewhere. Military is San Diego, and they have been successful in tying in everything with the support of your military. And this I see as a hurdle for us to get past that. It's just an assumption that, here we are, this military camp, which we're not, so we should be supporting the military. Well, here, this is for the military. Is there a way to avoid that trap?
I mean, what I would suggest, I don't have in front of me right now, but in the paperback version of my book that just came out, and by no means saying it's like, oh, I'm just showing you where you can get what I'm about to tell you. There's a, can you slide that to one where you don't get away? So I have at the, I believe it's in the middle of the book, I have compiled just a handful of quotes about Blackwater from military officials, including some very senior military officials. And I think it would be very important to have quotes from United States military officials on big placards and what they have to say about the operations of this company, because this is not, the military across the board is not a cheerleading squad for Blackwater. And let me tell you why. First of all, these guys get paid much more than regular soldiers who wear the flag of the United States of America and are in a war zone with inactive body armor. General David Petraeus costs U.S. taxpayers about $500 a day. A Blackwater operator in Iraq costs taxpayers $1,222 a day. When Blackwater goes and shoots up a bunch of people, who do you think has to deal with the aftermath of it? The Iraqis who are victimized don't say, well, we're going to go find Blackwater and attack them. No, oftentimes it's the U.S. military that gets attacked in response to this. And it ultimately gives the U.S. military an even worse name in Iraq, because Iraqis see this as all the occupation. And so there are quotes of U.S. military officials talking about the lack of accountability of these forces in Iraq and how they've actually hurt the United States military. If you wanted to follow up, I'll find this.
Let me speak to that because this is a local issue, but it has immensely large constitutional questions, particularly with respect to this notion of private warlords doing the work that has historically been done by personnel from the government that are under control of civilian elected officials. The military is, whatever one might think of the mission that they are employed at today, highly trained and very responsible, and the internal spirit of the military is one that has a great deal of pride in the high nature of the missions that they are employed to do on behalf of the United States. Now, this particular administration has corrupted that in a way that is very similar to corruption that existed in the Burma Triangle and our employment of the warlords from Burma in the Vietnam War. So we have to make that distinction. We have to understand that this is really a local issue that has immense constitutional ramifications. Are we going to become a nation that subsidizes warlords? Are we going to become a nation that gets our, quote, dirty work done by mercenaries that are not, in fact, accountable and have none of the code of honor that the actual military personnel pride themselves in having? I think the warlord idea is much more powerful than the mercenary.
But not in response to what she's saying is you're in a very heavily area very heavily populated by military people. You start talking about warlords, you're gonna not even get to the front door of the conversation with people who are in the United States military. I think particularly in this community, it's very important to meet people where they are. And I think that you have the best argument in this community against Blackwater as a whole is to look at their record in Iraq and how they've harmed U.S. troops. Secretary Gates himself, Bush's own defense secretary, said that their actions in Iraq are at cross purposes to the mission of the United States military. I mean, when you're talking about this community, if you're not able to explain why they should be against it, not why the world should be against it, why they specifically should be against it, you're going to lose the battle here. And I think that there's a great case to be made that these forces harm the United States military and put U.S. soldiers at risk. And I think if you talk to military people in this community, you'll find that they probably have very strong opinions about them, particularly men and women who've been in Iraq and been around them. And so don't immediately assume that because it's a pro-military community that it's going to be pro-Blackwater, because a lot of stuff has hit the fan in Iraq because of the actions of these guys, and a lot of soldiers have paid a very high price for their misconduct. And you know, I find traveling around the country, I have a lot of people that come up to me that identify themselves as traditional conservatives or pro-military, and they'll say, you know, I think you're full of, you know what, about the Iraq, but I agree with you 100% on this issue. And to me, that's the way to approach it with the military here, is to meet them on the issue that most directly impacts their life and their work, which is that Barack Obama has said it. They put U.S. troops at risk in Iraq. And there are volumes of quotes that emerged from Henry Waxman's hearing last October from U.S. military officials talking about the blowback impact of these forces. To me, that's the way to talk about it with military folks here, because that's what matters to them most.
I think another key response to that would be that to really start to ask some questions about how the economics is developing in this kind of new venture. One of the ideas that we've always had in Ysidro is that we need to develop and look for the next new economy that really can harmoniously benefit San Diego Tijuana, and to consider Mexico when making these kinds of decisions. And one of the things that that I would put on the table is that economic development, the approach that the federal government has with developing economic strategies is pretty wide open. It's going to need to be tied into how this new border develops. One of the big things that I think is going to be important is to just highlight how much more money would be going into a Blackwater operation as opposed to, who should be taking care of the operation. So different connections need to be made. I'm sorry I'm not going to make it for the 17th to be able to go to this, but we've been working really, really hard through other venues to highlight the potential development opportunities for redesigning the Ysidro Port Metro, making sure that we ask all the questions that we need to be asking of operations and or efficiencies that should happen at that border. Because it is directly tied to economic development in the region, it is extremely important to make sure that it gets done correctly. So while we have this general discussion about border stations, it's not tied into the overall discussion of border strategies and how we should be dealing with the border. I think that Congressman Filner and other elected officials should make those connections to look. You want to go ahead and move forward with border development in the actual physical aspect of what's happening around here. You should also consider border policies and or other operations that are happening, or else we're not going to move forward on giving the appropriations for $500 million to develop this border station. I mean, all those different connections and dots that need to be connected should be brought to the table. Getting other community input like the Otay Mesa Community Planning Group, the Otay Mesa Chamber of Commerce, the Regional Chamber of Commerce to really chime in on what's happening. So I think the economic also argument and bringing up all those different issues really play hard with getting the attention on an issue that is very vague, right? Homeland security and its approach. Something has to happen post 9/11 to respond, but it should not just be made up as we go on. It should be a clear direction that we head in. I think that's another argument there is just to look at the economic impact issues and ramifications that we do.
Yeah, I really think that those of you from San Ysidro have to help, and we can do a little bit from the sidelines, but have got to help get the community educated so that they can make that decision. I mean, I think it's wonderful that the Chamber of Commerce anyways on the school district. We got it is here, but this has got to be heard a lot broader because the depth of lack of knowledge or misinformation is going to hurt. I was going to direct, I like what you said about the economy. I was going to direct my points to the issue of self-determination. San Ysidro has traditionally been in the backwater of all the decisions made. It has been the place for environmental racism, where it is the last to be considered in the budget of San Diego. This is where all the refuse, you know, that is not wanted in other places is going to be taking place. And it's part of the racialized politics that's gone on. And you have to ask yourself, you know, what is Blackwater going to do in this context? Whose side are they going to be on when it comes to the issue of border crossing? Are they going to be interested in culturally sensitive in interchange and the development of ties between the U.S. and Mexico, or is their point of view going to be entirely militaristic, you know, the division of countries rather than the breaking down of borders? The basic vote mobilized against them. When the vote in Potrero happened, they go now. The vote in Potrero actually happened. What was the first public comment that came out of Ontario? Well, we really don't pay attention to the issue of what the people say. I don't know what the exact quote is, but you know that's the essence of it. Second issue, you know, in democracy, are things like privatization. These people want to set up a private, you know, CIA. My partner's private email got published in an affidavit put out by Blackwater for the federal courts. They are spying on people. If you think you're going to be, you know, outside their control, you know, think again. And that very much includes people in any position of power in this city and in this institution, including politicians. In the struggle we had against Titan Corporation, the little investigation we did on Titan, we were kind of exposing them for Abu Ghraib, we found out that Titan Corporation was the #1 donor to every congressperson in San Diego County, including Susan Davis, with the exception of Bob Cronin. They use money that they get from tax dollars and they feed it into the very institutions that go back and grease their wheels. And you have no idea, you know, all of their employees, you know, add to that. It means that all of your basic democratic institutions here will, you know, once they get their foot in the door, will be manipulated. And lastly, Blackwater is part of a very racialized view of the world. And so when they go into Katrina, they did not go in there with rowboats to rescue grandmothers off the roofs. They came in with guns, and you know exactly who they were pointing those guns at. And in San Ysidro, that's a very dangerous situation.
I was just going to say that one of the important things in Potrero stopping Blackwater was that people in the community who had concerns about it started meeting together to talk about what they could do, what their strategies might be, and then organizations like mine and Raymond's, we started meeting with them also just to see what we could do to help. I think that it's really up to the community to decide how they want to proceed with it. But I'm hoping that maybe out of this meeting there could be some core group that might start meeting to talk about bringing Jeremy back or how we might approach just encounter that type of thing. But I think it should be locally grown. We're willing to come and help and do what we can, but we really want to see the community take the leadership in this issue because that's where the voice is, and that's the struggle, and that's what democracy is about. And you really need to claim the community on this issue because we are going to take advantage of power.
You represent the Chamber of Commerce?
Correct.
Are you aware of the protest demonstration this afternoon over at the facility?
No, I'm not. Actually, there are more than just one person here that can be chamber, but I don't think I'm either. Anybody else is aware of that.
But there might be an opportunity for a viral marketing and distribution of that information so that instead of there being a handful, there's hundreds.
What you have
From 3 to 5 today, there's going to be a rally in front of the Blackwater facility in North Mesa. Congressman Filner's going to call in from Washington, and there's going to be, as well, representatives from civil rights organizations around California. People Lopez over there.
So it's from 3 to 5 in the Blackwater facility. And sort of an interesting fact direct response to us enacting the conservation law. They did exactly the same thing when we held a demonstration in Truro. They had people gathering across the street. Very provocative, very provocative action.
I think it'll be more impressive that food is provided by Blackwater.
I think it's important to have literature that's also bilingual on this
And we can do that.
campaign. Also, I just wanted to mention that the book that I wrote about Blackwater was translated into Spanish, and it's right now it's only in Spain. But in September, we're releasing the book completely updated in Spanish in the United States, and we've made it so that it's we're trying to make it so that it's very affordable, and that we can make copies available to groups around the United States, because ultimately this is going to become a life and death issue, as it already is for so many immigrant communities. And so I'll try to once we start getting copies of that, I'll try to make them available as fast as we can to people that live in this area through organizations that all of you represent. So we'll work on that maybe as early as August we can have them.
Maybe a couple more comments.
Maybe I got a quick question for you. First off, thanks for coming.
No.
It's good to do all this. Second, kind of just a step back. We're in the midst of presidential election, and when Barack Obama's proposed legislation to hold private security firms accountable, but at the same time it's kind of contradictory itself, or talked about maybe keeping private security firms within the What's your opinion of Blackwater's future in the next 10 years?
I've been talking about this a lot. I think Blackwater's future has never looked brighter. Across the board, Blackwater continues to win. And rather than be punished for acts of misconduct or killing innocent civilians, Blackwater just gets rewarded with more contracts. And one of the things that Blackwater is doing now, in addition to its expansion in the U.S. and its ongoing work in Iraq, their contract was just extended for another year in Iraq, is that they started a private intelligence company called Total Intelligence Solutions. And it's being run by 3 veterans of the CIA, one of whom, Enrique Redrado, is a veteran of Latin America for the CIA and from the CIA paramilitary division. They have other people who are Latin America specialists from U.S. intelligence that are working for them. And now their careers are essentially on the open market for bidding. And they say in their literature, we can bring CIA-type services to the corporate boardroom. And they're marketing their services to Fortune 500 corporations and governments. And that's a very lucrative business. 70% of the U.S. intelligence budget is now outsourced, 70% of it. And so, Blackwater's doing that. They're manufacturing armored vehicles. They're making surveillance blimps. They have an aviation division that works with the Pentagon, operating flights in Central Asia. They work for the Drug Enforcement Agency. They work for ICE. They work for Homeland Security. Even if they have to leave Iraq, let's say Obama decides somehow he's figured out a way to get Blackwater out of Iraq. It's going to be very difficult with his Iraq plan, because his Iraq plan is going to continue to butter the bread of these companies for at least 2 to 3 years. But let's say he figured out a way to just get Blackwater out of Iraq. It doesn't matter. Blackwater got what it needed out of Iraq. It already made the money. It already has the reputation as being this sort of force that will do anything to keep your men alive. And that's the reputation it wants. It's not like these guys are spinach farmers and they sold some tainted spinach and a bunch of people got sick. They're in the private security business, and they say the statistic about us that matters is the number 0. 0 Americans killed under our protection or seriously injured. So their reputation, while you or I might think it's questionable or controversial, for what they do, they have the reputation they want. They don't want people to think that they're softies who are going to worry about human rights. They want you to know we'll keep you alive. And so their future, they're so deeply embedded within the General Services Administration, the GSA, which is like the Walmart of government shopping. They're so deeply embedded in it that to get them out of it would require like a full-time, like a wing of the White House working on it. And it's just not going to happen. The Democrats now are getting more campaign contributions from the defense industry than the Republicans for the first time in 15 years. It's a business decision that these guys have made to give money to the Democrats. And I'm going to have a piece in the LA Times tomorrow talking about some of these issues regarding the election in Blackwater and also what Mesa as well.
They're the ones that serve as bodyguards for the name of you and Florida.
They have the contract to protect U.S. congresspeople, senators, and representatives when they go there. I would imagine that McCain did have a Blackwater detail around him because they're the ones that are supposed to guard Congress. When Nancy Pelosi goes there, she's guarded by Blackwater. McCain, though, with his ties to the military and the fact that he was talking to troops, maybe he had some kind of combined security detail, but that's one of the things Blackwater does. I should also say that John McCain, his top strategist, Charlie Black, who rides around on the Straight Talk Express with him. Charlie Black used to work for Blackwater doing PR, and actually was the guy who prepared the head of Blackwater to go in front of Henry Waxman's committee. So Blackwater sort of has a man on the bus with John McCain. I mean, you could rise in this last century. The Republicans could run like a head of lettuce or a yucca for president, and that yucca or that head of lettuce would be the candidate of the defense industry when it comes to politics or ideology. But Obama won't be bad for their business. And to me, that's a cause for some concern when we talk about this issue.
Yeah, because my question is probably should have asked it earlier, but I'm curious to know who are the employees, how much do they do in terms of actively recruiting in their local bases, and just a little general demographics about how big their operations are in terms of how many people are in here.
Well, I mean, first of all, Blackwater operates on an independent contractor system, and that's the subject of an investigation involving the IRS, etc. But it also has a benefit outside of the tax issues, and that is that it's very difficult to pin down how many people work for them because they have so many independent contractors. The best estimates I've seen is that they have somewhere in the range of 20 to 30,000 operatives that they could call on at a moment's notice in their network that they could deploy somewhere, almost immediately. And they're constantly hiring, putting out job applications for snipers or bodyguards or scouts or drivers or medics. I mean, there's constantly want ads on their website. Blackwater has operated in at least 9 countries, but now it seems like many more because they recently were in Africa, in Kenya, for instance. They did a hostage rescue of these Christian missionaries that were there. But Blackwater's biggest bases of operation are in Moyak, North Carolina, Baghdad, Iraq, Amman, Jordan, and Kabul, Afghanistan. And I think that we have to look at the fact that Blackwater does a very robust business with multiple agencies of the federal government, as well as local law enforcement. In fact, I think that their business that they do in armed security overseas is not as lucrative as the business they do inside of the United States with their training program. I mean, they made over $70 million from Hurricane Katrina. They billed U.S. taxpayers $950 per man per day. And when I talked to the Blackwater guys on the ground working for them in New Orleans, they said they were making $350 a day. But when I got the contracts, they charged taxpayers $950 a day. So it's a $600 difference between what they paid their men and what they billed U.S. taxpayers. As far as recruiting goes, I mean, they do a lot of word-of-mouth recruitment in the United States. They have former Navy SEALs or Delta Force guys or people that were in the 82nd Airborne. But they also recruit in Latin America. Blackwater has had Colombians, they've had Chileans that have worked for them, Peruvians now that are a heavy presence within these private companies in Iraq. They've worked for another company called Triple Canopy. And a Blackwater operative from the United States who's a U.S. citizen can make about $650 a day in Iraq. When the Colombians were hired by Blackwater, they tried to pay them $34 a day. And when the Colombians arrived in Baghdad, the Bulgarians who were working for Blackwater laughed at the Colombians and they said, "You came here for $1,000 a month? No one comes here for $1,000 a month. We're going to need $4,000 a month." And that $4,000 a month is nothing compared to what the U.S. citizens are. And so there's also a sort of structural racism built into this as well. And the fact that in Latin America, many governments in Latin America are against the war. They said, we don't want to have our soldiers over there. And so the Bush administration uses companies like Blackwater to violate the sovereignty of Latin American countries by hiring their citizens to deploy them in a war to which the home government is opposed. And so, and then pays them $34 a day to be there. But they're targeting countries that the U.S. is economically destabilized or militarily destabilized, and taking advantage of the economic conditions of people there to make it cannon fodder for a war of conquest of sorts. We should wrap up on that.
Yeah, I want to maybe, I don't know if there's a burning question or a burning comment that someone would like to make before we finish up.
One thing I would say, Jeremy, thank you for coming and invite you to begin in July. I'm going to be, I have a panel discussion that's going to be talking about the international conference with us.
Oh, really? Where it's going to be in San Diego? When is it exactly?
July the 12th through the 15th. So, that's one of the, Scahill was,
Oh, congratulations.
And Kane and Obama are going to be at that conference.
Yeah. So,
that'll be great.
right.
Can I just add one thing, since I've got you here and there's people here? This was Cold War, but it needs to be weighed on several levels. And I don't know who wrote this, they wrote it really well. But if we're trying to get grassroots support for this can be, on a flyer, this here. Because there's a lot of people here who have no idea who Eisenhower is, who don't know the industrial military complex, and don't understand, and don't care to, or haven't been exposed to all of this background. And so what is important, I think, to get across to some groups is just how is this going to affect you and what you can do about it.
I mean, that would be an issue for I just read this myself. I mean, I think that's an issue to talk about locally here, and also the issue of language.
Yeah, that you've done this in Spanish is so awesome. And there's so many caring, intelligent, wonderful people that would like to take a stand and just don't have the information and don't know how to do it. So, empowering them at a different level, I think, could be very effective.
Well, and then I think that's a responsibility of a lot of the people that are sitting here also. So I think we need to take that as a major objective that can start today, tomorrow, and tomorrow.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'd like to, again, thank everyone for joining us this morning. The representatives of the various offices. And also, thank you, Jeremy, for joining us this morning. It's very fun to have you here in Ysidro to provide the information that you did and for us to be able to enter into a discussion on how we can work together